Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. Tonight we're doing a little something different. We usually are doing either video games or we're live streaming some tabletop games. Tonight we're actually going to be interviewing another storyteller, somebody I know and have known for a very long time. Has run a gauntlet of different games, across a variety of genres. So, to kick things off, Jeff, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you run? Like, what kind of games do you like?
First off, I've been a gamer since about 1998-ish, give or take. And between then and now, I've run a bunch of games ranging from other World of Darkness games, Vampire, Werewolf. I think those were pretty much the only two I've actually run out of the World of Darkness. Oh, and Hunter.
Yeah.
And then I've gone to Pathfinder. I think that's the closest to D&D. I don't think I've ever actually storytold.
You never
D&D.
actually run D&D?
Star Wars. I don't think I've actually run D&D. No, because when I started getting really interested in D&D, that's when Pathfinder first started coming out. So I ended up pumping a lot of money into the Pathfinder series, and that's kind of when I started really getting into that genre of game.
Right. Hey, thanks for the follow there. Those are no spot. I completely butchered that, I'm sure. That was probably something that I could have done a lot better. So I apologize. All right, so
other than that, Star Wars sagas, and I think a handful of other games, but those are probably the main ones, or the World of Darkness ones I called out, and then the Star Wars and Pathfinder.
Right. So do you have a favorite system that you've run?
If you're going by how many times I've run it, it'd be Vampire the Masquerade.
I don't know if I
favorite.
go by how many times you've run it. I think more like, what do you enjoy running?
My favorite to run is probably Star Wars. And it's not necessarily due to like knowledge of the system or even knowledge of that universe. I've always liked Star Wars, and you've actually run a couple Star Wars games that I've played in, and that's what kind of turned me onto the system, and really kind of fueled my drive to get into that universe, the Star Wars universe. Because up until you ran our first game back in, I don't know, what was that, like 2004, 2005,
something around that. That was a long game. That lasted like 2 years, 2.5 years.
Actually, it was a little later than that. It was like 2008 or 2009. Okay. But that's when I first started going, Star Wars is a viable roleplay system and a viable universe because it's so expansive. Like we could run in the same era and completely never converge storylines if we were in the same universe. It's that expansive.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for the sub, Amar. I appreciate it. You're the next victim on this. Don't forget, you're going to be up here too. But
hi,
we had to switch. But yeah, I remember when we started running Star Wars. There was a common misconception that if you're not playing a Jedi, you're not playing Star Wars. Like, there's no point in playing Star Wars. Now, remember the character you first played that changed your mind on that, and that was your bounty hunter, right? Your Mandalorian?
Yeah, the Mandalorian bounty hunter who became a Terrace Kazi master. Yeah, that kind of opened my eyes to the fact that you can, at least with that system, you can play a character that has nothing to do with the Force and still be just as fulfilling in the story and feel just as fulfilled, like you've accomplished something in that story.
Fair enough.
The saga system is what we're specifically talking about, was very good at making it to where no class really is better than any other, because there will always be situations where you need something other than a Jedi.
That's very true. And I think that system is really, really well, like you were saying, set up for that type of play. The way that skills are doled out and the way that talents occur. For those who haven't played the Saga game for Star Wars, that was the Wizards of the Coast published one before Fantasy Flight took over the IP. You can probably still find it, I think. I think it's still on Drive for RPG. I'm not sure.
I think it is.
But that being said, clearly there's a lot of different tastes in the things that you've run and the things that you've played. And we know you've run Vampire more often, you said, but you prefer running Star Wars. That's your favorite system to run. How are those two different? You've run Vampire a lot, you've run Star Wars now, you're running one currently. How would you say those two games are different to run in like?
They're really different, actually. They take completely different approaches. For Vampire and for most World of Darkness in general, it's very dark. A lot of that revolves around personal horror, things of that nature, which do play a part in Star Wars, but it's a small part. Star Wars is more action adventure. It's just as intimate as far as the storytelling, but in general, it's a lighter mood thing. You're not looking to get down. There's not that super serious, almost depressive feel around the world, or around the universe, I should say. So it's very different. But as far as the approach of doing most games, especially within the last couple years, I've changed my approach from worrying about the overall arcing story to more focusing on my players. When I first started out, I was kind of a brutal
Okay.
storyteller. I didn't have a problem killing off my players if the situation deemed it fit.
Okay.
Whereas now, especially after like playing in a lot of games, with several different storytellers, I've noticed that things are much more impactful if the moment calls for something that drastic, if it's going to impact the story as a whole for the rest of your players. Something that pulls on heartstrings, that gives your players drive, that gives them that that true to life kind of three dimensions.
Right. So speaking on that really quick, um, if you have somebody who's a new storyteller, new dungeon master, your narrator, etc., and they were trying to choose between, let's say, Star Wars or something like the World of Darkness, what would you suggest as a start off point? Because as you're saying, the two systems run very differently. The mood, the theme is very, very different between the two of them. What do you think is more easy to grasp for a person brand new to running games?
I think it kind of depends almost on your personality. If you're into the dark gothic personal horror, creature of the night scenario type of person, you want to tell that darker story, definitely gonna want to go World of Darkness, I would say. Whereas, like I said, Star Wars has kind of got that lighter heart. You can think of it like a movie. You have the three acts, right? So you have the build up, the the climax in essence, and then the end of the story, I guess you could say. So it's very different for a beginning storyteller. Like I said, it's all about your personality, what you are comfortable with, and what you want to tell.
Now, you can definitely take similar types of stories from each one and tone them for for whatever genre you're telling it in. Like a kidnapping story can be very different, but can very easily be run with both Star Wars and World of Darkness. It's just everything
Oh,
around that
definitely.
is a bit different. But the
Right.
characters are very, very different in the way that they interact with the world and the way that they're made. And on that note, like I know that a lot of different storytellers, a lot of different GMs have different views on how to make characters with players. Some people will have their characters just made by their players and just get handed over to them. Some like to walk through the creation process. What do you prefer?
I like to kind of be involved with the character creation process. It gives me a feel, one, of what's going on in Emperor, one of what what mood that person is looking to grasp with their character, um, and it gives me a good idea
Yes,
of kind of the
Chicago.
story they're looking for. Yeah,
Emperor.
of kind of the story they're looking for. So, I mean, the more information you get about a person's character, you can kind of glean the themes that they're looking to interact with, what they want to portray,
Mhm.
and things of that nature. And you can, first, for a storyteller, for anyone, you should take that information and make sure to interweave that into your story, because you got to remember, at the end of the day, it's all about fun for you and your players, and your players are center stage. They're your stars.
Just as a reminder, we are definitely taking questions from chat. If you guys have anything you want to toss out there, questions that are like on your minds, things that you think are interesting that you want some outside opinions on, feel free to toss them up, and we'll definitely get to them. But on that, really quick, this idea of taking characterization and character backgrounds and kind of using that for your stories, um, getting involved with character creation from the get-go as a storyteller. Do you do it differently for different systems? Like, if you're running, let's just continue on this theme as well, a game for Star Wars and then one for Vampire, are you there as much of the way with the players? Are you just as dedicated to either one? Or is one a little more hands-off than the other?
It's I guess it depends on the situation. So we'll take Vampire for instance first. A lot of the people that I game with, you yourself, and most of the crew that we're going to be gaming with regularly and have been gaming with regularly, you guys and they in general are all very knowledgeable about the game and usually have a very good idea of what they want to play. I'd like to be involved enough to be able to glean what my players are looking for, but in that aspect I can also glean that by looking over the character, and within the first, I'd say, session or two of the actual game itself, I've got a pretty good handle on what that person is trying to get from the game. So the first two games, in my opinion, are very crucial. And it's similar for Star Wars, but Star Wars I'd rather be like right there with each person almost, because it's such a different system, and I have, I guess, less of a grasp on Star Wars than I do on Vampire, and I want to make sure I get it right the first time.
Okay.
I'm also about, like, after the first game or two, I'm also pretty regular about asking, hey, did everyone have fun? What were you looking for more of? What are you looking for your character to engage in? So I can tweak the story to do that. And I'll do that with pretty much all of my games.
So that brings up a really good point that chat just had too about this idea of session zero. Now, speaking for myself, when I started playing, there was no such thing as a session zero. Those didn't happen. Session zero became this new, like, weird hybrid between not only character creation but also a prelude. For those who play Vampire or World of Darkness games, you're familiar with the idea of the prelude, the prologue. So, in that respect, when we started coming up with gaming, the session zero idea had not been really fully formed. You made your character whenever you could with the DM or the storyteller, and then you gave them your background, and you just started playing. Maybe you would play through the prelude or prologue, but you would get to things. But Baron Prawnbroker here and chat is asking, how do you go about setting up a session zero that helps you find out what type of character they want to play? Now, when you were just talking, you're saying that you kind of get an idea by helping them through the character creation process. Now, do you prefer to do that one-on-one, or do you do the whole group and do like this idea of a session zero to get everybody together?
I think it's easier to do a session zero. Reason being is because you can take that time frame, whatever, couple hours or whatever, and kind of, you not only get a feel for their character, but you can bounce things off of each other, and the things that are talked about for group cohesion can also help you as a storyteller better weave them into your overall story.
Fair enough. I know.
So I like the idea of session zeros. They definitely help.
I'm generally not a fan of them usually, to be honest, but I think that's not because I don't think they're useful. I think they are. And I think that there are certain games that I personally run where I want to get a session zero so that everybody's on the same page, But for me, and this may be for a lot of other seasoned storytellers out there who've worked with this, and by seasoned I mean played with the same group for a long time, right? A lot of storytellers who run for the same group continuously kind of know where their players end up falling on the spectrum, right? So for me, a session zero is not really necessary because I kind of already know what things each player at my table likes to do, and I try to hit on that. I do like to have background to characters because I can weave that in a story, but I do that during a character creation process. Like, usually I'll have somebody roll up a character, unless there's dice rolling involved, which I want to be there for, on their own, and then send it to me, and then we'll do like a open-ended feedback back and forth. Now, when it sounds like you'd rather be there with them while they're doing this step one, to the end of this process. Do you ever?
Yeah, I think in general, it gleans the same information as just having that open-ended messaging back and forth. I just think as a storyteller, I get more of a feel for my players when they're all discussing what's going to be, you know, what their characters are, like their backgrounds, their general mannerisms. And it also gives me a good idea at that point of okay, this person or this specific character has something going on that may not gel with the group. We might need to alter it. Is where you may not, if you don't do a session 0, you may not necessarily find that out until game 1 or game 2, and then it's like, oh you know, crap, we got to kind of go back or alter this quirk or this problem to help with group cohesion.
And that's, I was actually about to bring that up before I get to this next question from chat. I was going to follow up with that and say, like, you know, have you ever had an issue where you've done the session 0 and like going back and going over your story and going, oh crap, we need to fix this, isn't working. On my end, I like having that back and forth over a longer period of time, because then as I'm writing down notes for my storylines, I can actually realize, hey, I want to change this one thing. Let me talk to the character. So for me, I think that takes the pressure off of having a session 0, but I do think it's very useful. Now, to this question that Redden just asked in chat, what strategies do you two use to integrate a fresh player to one of the systems that they have heard about but never played with this season group? So I'll fill the first part of this really quick, and then we'll see what our guest has to say. For me, the way I integrate a new player, like if I'm bringing somebody new into my circle with all the other season players, or maybe even 2 new players, I want to get everybody together so we make sure personalities first, right? Because we've all had a game where we've introduced somebody new to the game and they just don't work with the table. You know, there's that little bit of friction. It was like, you know, on second thought, maybe this was a bad idea, you know? And games have died for things like that. But to integrate them to new systems, I like getting to talk to their players and not necessarily come in under their wing, but to know that they can lean on other players for questions and help should they need it, right? And I know that around a lot of tables, players specialize in different portions of the rules or the setting, right? And I think that if the players are open for it, allowing them to be kind of like a resource for the new players, like if they have questions, that they can ask them, you know, like, hey, between game sessions, like message somebody a text message or your Discord group or email or however you guys play, be like, hey, I'm a little curious about this rule, how does it work? And I think that fostering that communication as a storyteller at the table, it doesn't leave a player feeling like they're beholden to just you. It makes it a more welcome environment on the whole, in my opinion. What do you feel, Jeff?
I definitely pretty much agree wholeheartedly with what you said. Other than that, you got to try and make that person, especially if they're a new gamer in general, you just have to make them as comfortable as they can be. There's going to be some anxiety. There's going to be some wonder always until the game itself, I guess, starts. First couple sessions, you kind of get your feet under, right. You know? You just got to make sure that before that point, that everybody at the table, including your new person, is 1, comfortable with the group, 2, comfortable with the system and the overall universe, like a basic knowledge, and 2 is comfortable and what's the word I'm looking for? Just comfortable and confident with their character, because in the end, that's what they control. It's their character. Yeah. So the more comfortable you are with that, the easier it is to integrate into a whole system.
And speaking of that, like as far as that new character and learning the system, I think that you bring this awesome point about comfortable and confident with their character that they made. And I think that helping a new player get into a brand new system with seasoned players that's what you focus on first. Who do you want to play? What do you want to do? Let's help you make that character. And if you have, Jeff got some giant books. So yeah, he does, Nate. You got some big ass books. Those are the giant size. You didn't see those before? Thought you knew everything about vampires. No.
I spent an extra $50 on each of those books to get them that big.
Special printing.
And the writing is that big.
You don't even need glasses to read it. So,
right.
But
that's why I bought it.
Yeah, I think that's what serves best is when you bring somebody new into a season table. Is like, what do you want to play? And then making room for them, not only at the table as a person and as a character, but in the story. Because I think that if you really want to integrate a new player at a table, if you really want to get them involved, you have to hook their character into what's going on. I tend, like, if it's a new player, I tend to do that slowly because I don't want to overwhelm my player with all the stuff that's going on that they may not really have a good, firm, confident grasp on yet. But just slowly ease them into plot, get them more and more involved, and make them feel that they have an impact. Because if you feel that you're at a new table with a bunch of new people, that your stuff that you're doing isn't really making a difference, it sows disinterest, right? But if you feel that your actions are actually making an impact on the story and on the other characters, in my opinion, you grow more enthused about playing and more enthused about being a part of that group, and that gets you more willing to try out new stuff. Maybe if you're shy, kind of crawl a little bit and get on a limb and try some new stuff. And I think that's really a really good way to integrate a new player or group of players into an existing group.
And kind of piggybacking off of that a little bit, also keep an open mind after the first game or two with anybody, not just new players, even old seasoned players. Give them the room to alter their character if they feel that this character is just not fitting. I'm not feeling this guy, but I have a good idea of what I want to do now that we're a couple game sessions in. Kind of allow them to tweak it and whatnot, because you don't want to force them to play the character, because again, like you said earlier, it sows disinterest.
Right.
And two, if you're going to have more fun, altering a couple things on your character, a couple talents, a couple disciplines, a couple skills, to me, that's not a big deal. That's you tweaking your character after the first couple of sessions to what you're more interested in said story.
Yeah, and just add Obeah. Everybody should get Obeah. But
right, just add Obeah. Everybody. Go level 4, and then XP will get to level 5 if need be.
Then a little Valor and the Season of Taste. Baron has another question. What techniques would you recommend using to help players immersion into your world, and what pitfalls should we avoid? That's a multi-layered question. Yeah, so I'll take first crack. I think pitfalls are different depending on the group, if that makes sense. Because if you're trying to pull somebody into the world, and let's use World of Darkness for example, and they're just getting to learn that world and how dark it can be, some players that have tried to read up on it and want to get really involved, they'll dig if you just go overboard on detail. Here's what's going on, you put the pressure on. They're learning by fucking up, essentially. And some players really like that. Let me try this thing. Oh, okay, well, I got staked for 2 months because I punched the sheriff's ghoul, Some players don't mind that. They'll take those hits and keep rolling. Right. I frenzied on the Golden Gate Bridge and killed somebody with a truck door, Yeah. Some players don't mind learning through hard knocks like that. They actually enjoy it because they get to experience more of the world. They've made a splash, and it can be entertaining for them. Other players, man, if you stake them with their first character for doing something they thought was completely legit and they weren't quite sure how that would go, you might just lose a player. You got to really read your table. So there's no universal pitfalls, except for one. And I hold very strongly to this one. If you're teaching a new player about the world and the consequences therein, do not make every encounter something that can kill them. Because if you start making it where every social interaction they have can end up with them dead or in torpor in the case of vampire, or in harrowing in the case of wraith, or raging back in the case of werewolf, if every NPC they talk to has that kind of consequence and mindset, you're gonna kill. I've watched it happen. Jeff and I have watched a man's will to play vampire die a horrible death because of things like this. So that's the one pitfall I say is universal. Don't be the consequence-driven storyteller. Be a little more understanding about them learning and their process of learning in the world. That's really the only thing that is universal. As far as techniques to get them,
not just that, don't browbeat mistakes. Whether it's a seasoned or a new player, don't be like, "Oh man, you shouldn't have done that," or "Damn, that was dumb. Why the fuck would you do that?" Don't do stuff like that, because that will discourage anybody, seasoned, new, anything like that. Just try and help. I guess coach is probably the best word. Be like, "Hey, just so you know, like for next time, let's take a step back and examine what happened, and we'll see where it went wrong, and like different ways you can kind of fix it for next time. Just how that's kind of how I learned. I mean, I made all sorts of mistakes, especially when I first started gaming with you guys and at Falco's. I mean, I went to feed my first game and was beaten to torpor by an old 87-year-old bag lady.
Because
I didn't know what
I apologize. I wasn't laughing because of what you're saying, but this image in my head of taking a player and going, "Look what you did! Look what you did! Don't do that.
Put your nose in it.
Right? Look what you did." But yeah, I've done some horrible stuff to players. I beat somebody in a torpor with an easy bake oven. You know, so
that's you did.
I did in live action. That was a lot of fun. But yeah, in order to help players' immersion, I do think coaching is a good idea. One of my first things that I like doing a lot when it comes for consequences, and it's something that could potentially be bad for a player, I'll ask them, "Are you sure that's what you want to do?" Because usually that question is a leading question, and they'll immediately go, "Well, why do you say that?" And then you can explain a little more about what's going on. Like, "Hey, here's a circumstance, here's the politics of what's going on here that you may not be aware of." You know, or my favorite is, you know, being so familiar with the sheets where it's like, "All right, look at your sheet. You have these skills. What do you think applies here?" You know, and help them get immersion through not only understanding their sheet, but how their sheet applies to the world, the rules of the world at large. And I think that can help them get more comfortable with the sheet. And I think once you're comfortable with the sheet, you get more comfortable with the world. And once that happens, immersion's easy.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And also, another good thing to do in general, outside of coaching, is just talking to the players about that universe or that world or some of the other things going on that they haven't seen because they weren't part of what took place.
Right.
They're like, "Oh, you know, this is what's going on," and you may help somebody realize, "Oh man, my character, once he finds that out, is totally going to think like this." Or, you know, telling someone after the fact that this is what was kind of going on, they could have that like realization, "Oh man, you know, I didn't think about that. Maybe my character would have acted like this instead." It just kind of helps build them to better themselves as a role player and better yourself as a storyteller. You can see pitfalls coming then when you as a storyteller mess up.
Yeah.
You kill somebody because you're like, "Oh, I only saw this outcome," and then your player's like, "Well, I saw it like this," and you're like, "Huh, I didn't even look at it that way."
Yeah, that's those types of conversations can be interesting around the table. Reddit had an add-on here. When trying to help a player learn about a different system in the same genre, so for example, World of Darkness difference between LARP versus tabletop, Guru versus vampire, different versions. The age-old struggle of this is not that, but is. Okay, so if somebody's playing werewolf and they want to get introduced to the vampire type thing, that's rough because the premise of those two games are very different, right? Werewolf is this runaway freight train of an action game where it's about combat all the time, you know, kicking ass for Gaia type situation. For vampire, while they share the same universe, is a very different beast altogether. Like, I don't think any, like if we look at Guru, for example, I don't think any other game comes close to that in terms of sheer violence outside of Hunter, to be completely truthful.
And even that less so, I would think, than Guru.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, hunting and killing is a way of life for Hunter until you go insane or die, but for Guru, it's just nonstop rage and destroying shit. And then, yeah, I know I got Guru fans in the chat, I'm about to piss them off. Guru is a shit system for a roleplay. I'm sorry, had to say it. And I say that because everything's based on this aggressive pecking order that requires that you get stomped to shit if you step out of line. And I think that that really causes a rift between people who like Guru versus people who like Vampire. And yes, you can do all kinds of stupid ass-kicking craziness in Vampire, but it's not on the same level as Guru at all. In live action, it can be because live action vampires have bomb ties, Guru don't. Sorry for people not familiar with LARP. This is a small little
whole other conversation.
But in tabletop, a werewolf will whoop the shit out of multiple vampires of the same power level without breaking much of a sweat because they're just built for it. And I think that really, I've seen a lot of Guru players, and this is one thing I don't like about Guru or Old World of Darkness. I've seen a lot of Guru players take the genre as an excuse to be a munchkin and just write characters do nothing but kick ass. yeah, that's what the setting's for. And yeah, social roleplay can be a rough because you're supposed to be this rage-filled fucking engine of destruction for Gaia. But at the same point in time, you have to have some sort of roleplay aspect of the character. It can't just be all ass kicking all the time. And I think in Werewolf it's harder to write for because players are naturally inclined towards making combat characters. Yes, there's a spiritual side of Werewolf. Yes, you have Theurges. Yes, you have Galliards that tell the tales, but it's still about bloody, gory glory for Gaia in the end. It's what it's about. It's about killing the worm everywhere, wherever it lives and breeds. That's what you do. You just kill shit. Vampire, if you're bringing somebody who plays Guru into Vampire, you have to explain a very different reality to them. You have to have a come to Jesus moment. Like, you sit down and go, hey, you're familiar with the world of darkness and how horrible it can be? That's awesome. Play Guru. If I have a new player that comes to my table and goes, I want to learn more about Vampire, I've only played Guru, immediately in my mind I'm going, fuck me. Because we have to unfuck your head, as to everything you learn. I mean, it's not that dramatic, but you know what I mean? You're more geared towards everything as a combat solution. We take everything to the mound. We just kill shit for Gaia, and we do challenges. The mindset of that type of game is very different than Vampire, or even Changeling the Dreaming, or even Wraith, even Wraith. What is Wraith's thing? The Oblivion, yes.
Wraith.
So you have to change mindsets. You have to take what they do know about the world of darkness and how those similar meta plots run through the lines, but you have to really sit down and talk to them about, here's how this setting is different. In Vampire, combat is usually, it's an available option for everybody, but you don't want to get caught. In Guru, you want to get caught. You get bragging rights for fucking somebody up. In Vampire, not so much, unless you're playing Sabbat. And even then, there's a very codified rule of conduct of when you can actually do that. Especially if you're killing somebody. Very codified rules for that. But you really got to sit somebody down and explain the difference. Like, hey, it's a lot more political system. There's a lot more maneuvering here. Essentially, if I were going to take somebody playing Garuda and play Vampire, you're now playing Shadow Lords and Silver Fangs. Have a day. This is exactly, you have the politics, the back alley deals. You got to get used to doing that more often than handling everything with popping claws and going rage, The others...
Well, I think an easy way for, specifically for Vampire and Werewolf, an easy way to kind of start a Werewolf player transitioning into Vampire is to start with the system, because one, it's the same system, right? So you don't have to worry about that as much, but you start there. You start at the character concept base, and you go from, okay, this is the type of character you want to play. Now let me explain to you the climate of Vampire, the political issue, the personal horror issue, the for lack of a better term, the screw your buddy issue.
You mean the rule?
It's all about
an issue. It's a rule.
Right. Well, like I'm saying, you roll off of topics they're used to, so the system, the world, and then you start getting into the minutia of Vampire as opposed to the minutia of Werewolf, and that'll help transition them easier from LARP to tabletop. It's hard from LARP to tabletop because LARP and tabletop are two completely different animals.
I actually think LARP to tabletop is a lot easier, and vice versa, because at least in genre, right? Like if you're saying in genre, certain things translated to LARP from tabletop, but like the level system, five levels to each power, etc. Trait system's very different. Right. Abilities work differently, but the general theme and the general feel is still the same. It's just a different mechanic to learn. So I think that's an easier transition because the game itself is, like, genre-wise and plotline-wise and meta-plot-wise, all that's the same. It's just learning a new system to go with. Now, that can kick off a very prickly conversation about differences between LARP and tabletop because they're two different beasts when it comes to actual play. When you're playing tabletop, you're with a smaller group of people, usually just one coterie playing together, right? Your stories are a lot more rich and more detailed from the storyteller. You're usually doing a lot more character-driven stuff. When you play live action, you have upwards of 30, 40 different people, all vying for staff attention when they need to do side scenes and stuff like that. But also you have all those different personalities out there that are out for themselves. And it really becomes this sink or swim situation. The problem with LARP versus tabletop, though, is that while points really make a huge difference in tabletop, they make a much more severe difference in live action, because the way the power levels work, especially for something like Vampire, it really outstrips other builds. Like if we're talking V5 Vampire is much more balanced across the board. Just by having potency, you don't automatically win. Just by having celerity, you don't automatically win. Just by having fortitude, you don't automatically have the invulnerable body. It helps. All those powers help. But in V20 and before, celerity is god. Potence is just ridiculously awesome, and if you don't have fortitude, you're just stupid. So some things become requirements, and in live action for Vampire, fleetness, Passance, Aegis, done. That's your basic build for awesomeness. Once you get that, branch off, flavor, sprinkle flavors as you will with disciplines. So the strategy for players can be very different in live action versus tabletop.
Right. And one of the other big differences between the two as well is you take a LARPer and put them in a tabletop scenario. You're taking a reactionary player 9 times out of 10 and putting them into a proactive game, and vice versa. You have to find it's all that, unfortunately, is experience based. You won't know it until you play it.
I think that's a really good comment right there, actually. And I think that very much sums up a lot of things I've seen as a org storyteller for live action, as well as a very busy tabletop storyteller. That's a big difference. That's a very true thing to be said.
Yeah, because in tabletop, the story revolves around your players, so you be very proactive. You have the one-on-one time with your storyteller to do what you want to do, whereas in live action, that storyteller and his group of narrators, if he has any, are dedicated to the game, which can be upwards of 30, 40, up to, I've seen games up to over 100, Lilatia being one of them. And the storyteller can't dedicate that time to every single person, but you have all these other players around you to be able to react to and to act off of. So you become a little more reactionary because there's so much going on around you with other PCs. Whereas tabletop, like I said, you're the stars. It is your show. Now, the storyteller is there to help you get into that mindset, to give you the ideas of, hey, this is what's going on. This is what you can get into, right?
Yeah.
So that's a huge difference between LARP and tabletop. And I think a lot of people, until they experience both, struggle with one or the other.
It's very well said. I'm right now just inwardly cringing because I know we get so much hate for that commentary on Gru. I know it. I'm gonna get socially ostracized. But speaking of
and a lot of people treated Guru like superheroes.
Yeah, no,
and they're really not.
I agree.
They didn't take that 3. They took the combat and we kick ass for Gaia, and that's by the book. This is what we do, and it's there's a lot of depth to Guru. There's a lot of darkness to Guru. They're just as damaging and terrible to the world around them as vampires are, just in a different way.
Redden says the truth hurts.
And I think a lot of people ignore that. The truth hurts, yeah.
But I think you're right. I think it is kind of ignored a bit. And that's where you get to see a lot of this generality start to happen. People will just play the stereotype Gru, like the Fenrir Arun stereotype, angry all the time, man. And it kind of really casts a shade.
Wrong. I like that stereotype.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's true. But speaking of which, talking about reactionary versus proactionary, Jesus. Talking about reactionary versus proactive players. On a tabletop, when you're looking at stuff to be more proactive, how far ahead, do you usually plan your games? Do you do one session out? Do you do overall and just play that by ear? Like, how do you approach that?
I like to do. All right. So my approach to it is I will have an overall story. I know when we start where we're going to end. I don't know exactly how we're going to get there.
Mm-hmm.
I will piece that together game session to game session. And a good example of that is your last Star Wars game. Some of the things you did, not killing the bounty hunter and actually making him an ally. Not killing the woman who was trying to run from you guys, making her an ally. Those people are going to come into play down the road, without a doubt. I already know how I'm going to do it. That's if you guys don't call them prior to what I had planned. So to me, that's a huge thing. I like building off of what's done. Again, it feels more real. You build friendships in the real world. They're your friends. You can call on them. You can talk to them. Same thing in my game world. Just because you meet someone and get their phone number doesn't mean I'm never going to use them again. I write them down in my little book, and this includes enemies,
Right.
people you make as enemies. Things you do will always have a benefit or a drawback based on your interaction with that specific person or that situation in general. And I think, like I said, that really helps with shaping the characters that are playing, helping shape their personalities. And I think it makes more of an impact.
No, I
It
agree.
means the storyteller paying attention to the characters and they're not just taking everything other than what's planned through the story and just focusing on those aspects. Because again, you've got to build a 3D world. You got to make it as real as possible. That is the easiest way to get your players immersed.
Yeah, you think so?
The more real it feels to them, the more comfortable they'll become, and the more impactful your game becomes overall.
Fair enough. Is there a way that you approach writing for different systems? Like, does your approach to that type of this idea of pre-planning and only like giving a lot of leeway and only doing like where we're going to end point, but the journey is going to be a variable? Does that change how deep you go into detail on those planning sessions depending on what system you're running?
I don't think so. I try and go as deep as possible. Like I said, especially in the last couple of years, I like to build my stories around the characters that are playing. Whether that's just you and 3 other people, or if I'm doing you and 3 other people this day, you and 3 other people that day on a Discord game, say, and you have 30 players you have to work with, but it's still kind of a tabletop setting, just in the same world. I like to get immersed in the people I'm storytelling for at the moment.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, if you can run any game, like the even game that you have not tried, what would it be?
Oh, game, huh?
Yeah. And so let's say, and the first problem, the hurdle that can stop that is, let's say people are lining up to play. Like the people you have groups that will play it. What would it be if you run anything you wanted to?
As much as I really love Star Wars and I really love all the games that we play and that I run, I think an all-encompassing World of Darkness game. As in, I want to take a tabletop setting, and this is something I plan for the future. It's a big undertaking, so it's not that it gives me anxiety. It's just a big undertaking, and it makes it more difficult because the scope is going to be so big. But I want my players to. This week we're going to play Vampire. Well, now we're going to, in the same world, the same everything. Now you're going to play a pack of werewolves. Now you're going to play a Kamal Mages. Now, one thing that's going to be rough about that is it's going to be almost a hard time initially for the players to get into each character's mindset based on the week. But I think what would be cool is just seeing how all of your different characters and your different groups are affecting this world as a whole and having to deal with the problems of all of them through different genres.
Fair enough.
That's something I like to try and run.
Nate says, "Shut up. We all know everything in the world of darkness is just superpowers in the dark." Hey,
I've played games like that.
Where blood points are power points, and there's really no such thing as having to kill somebody to get blood or being hungry. I need more power because you have to construct more additional pylons or something. I've seen that happen. And don't get me started on freaking quintessence batteries that people walk around with in Mage.
Yeah.
Makes my heart hurt right here. It really does. So I'm gonna default to a question here. We got one of the things that came up when we opened up questions to people to recommend before we started, and one that got a lot of traction was is a two-parter. One, do you ever get like anxiety or anxious before either starting to write or run a game session? And two, if you do, how do you deal with it?
Yes. There's no way around it. I get just as excited and just as anxious as a player as I do as a storyteller. And that's just I guess it stems from I really want to be not only entertaining to my players or my co-players if I'm a player, but I want to make it just as fun for the storyteller, or for me if I'm storytelling, I want it to be just as fun for me as a storyteller. So there's always that doubt in the back of your head, am I not good enough? Is this going to fall flat? Am I going to fall on my face trying to run this? And the the only way around it, one, is just be confident in yourself, be confident in the story you want to run, and be confident with the players you're running it for. And two, you're not going to know until you do it. And that's kind of also why I give that flow when it comes to the first couple game sessions of players being able to tweak their character, because it helps me understand, okay, they're tweaking their character like so, they're looking to do this, or they want to be impactful here, and it just allows me to tweak the story so that everybody has a good time.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think that's just about all the time we have for questions. Unless somebody in chat wants to ask something additional, we're gonna probably wrap here in just a moment. I'll give you a second to ask those final questions. I'll ask one while we're waiting.
Don't be shy.
Do you have a specific type of character that you enjoy storytelling for more than others?
No, I have, and that's kind of weird. I enjoy storytelling for all different types of characters because it kind of helps mold the story and the table to be more invested.
Mm-hmm.
I like playing the ass kickers though. As everybody
Never would have
already
known it.
I like being able to throw down. It's fun. I like throwing dice on occasion. So it's weird. My storytelling style and my player style is completely different.
Yeah, that is a little strange, and I know that as in playing some of your games, it's not all about just kicking everybody's ass. So that kind of it's interesting. But I think every player has something they really like doing as an archetype of a character. So that makes sense. Redden does have a question here.
Yeah.
Why do you enjoy storytelling? What drives you to do it?
I guess the easiest way to put it, I've always kind of been like a people pleaser. I like when the people I'm around are happy. I'm kind of, as you can, from you've known me for so long, I like to bring joy. I like to make people laugh. I like to make people have a good time. And I guess that's really the big draw to storytelling, is because I want everybody around me and everybody involved with what I'm doing, I want you to have just as much fun as I'm having. And that's probably the biggest draw to storytelling for me, honestly.
I think that's kind of universal, at least in some respect, to almost all people who like storytelling. Is telling a good story, getting people involved. Oh, this is a touchy subject that Baron Palmbrook just brought up. I've seen this happen in games. I just want to put that out there right now. I've seen games where NPCs are actually storyteller PCs. So his question is, for those watching, how do you avoid using an NPC as your own character in the story? I.e., how to avoid the super NPCs?
So for me, I actually like using old characters, or even my old characters, as antagonists or allies, because I think it kind of is an homage to either other games you've played or something somebody had a good time with. But as far as using them as your own character, you can't do that as a storyteller. You're the world. All of them are your characters. The humans, the animals, the trees. The scene itself is yours.
I didn't know the trees had stat blocks.
Hey man, D&D tree ants and shit. Come on now.
I am Groot.
Right, I am Groot. Exactly. No, but you can't do that. One, it discourages your players. They come up against a character you really love, and well, I'm going to do what I can so these players don't win, or this is such a big badass elder, there's no way it's my favorite character. You can't do that. You really can't. Your favorite characters as a storyteller should be your PCs.
I agree. I actually had somebody I was running a Discord vampire game for a small, like 6 or 7 months, and a player came in from another server. One of my friends' friends, friend by association, that counts, comes in and says,
yeah,
and they actually asked me, like, we went out together to talk about characters for the game. So we went out, had a drink, and they turned to me and said, "So what character do you play in the game?" And I was confused. I was like, what? I run the game. Like, what do you mean? So I actually asked him, like, I don't understand the question. Like, what do you mean? Like, I mean, I play everybody, but you guys don't. She was, well, yeah, but I mean, like, what NPC do you play that goes and does stuff with players? I'm like, anybody's ally that's on their sheet that comes with them for the mission. Like, I don't have a character that I play as my own. Like, I don't have any one major active NPC. You know, I don't have the time for that. My job, as you're saying, is to play everyone else in the world that's around you. You know, why would I take the focus off of you by playing an NPC in the game? I think that's something that sometimes newer DMs, in my opinion, will do that because it helps them feel like they're part of the group, and they may do it with good intentions. Like, I'm going to play an NPC that's along with you, like a partner that helps you through some of your trials and tribulations and other issues. But there's a pitfall there. You know, it's not universal, but there's a pitfall that you can start making those players rely on the NPC and have it be more about the NPC than the players. And so in my mind, it's good to have networks of mentors or available contacts that PCs can go to for help, but it shouldn't be anybody that's with them on a regular basis, right? And if you want somebody there that's supposed to be with a PC, like if it's a small game, my best advice would be to try to recruit another player that can play somebody else to help them out. You know, if something in your group is missing, actively go out and see if anybody wants to play what you guys are missing.
I guess one of the ways around that actually would be like for newer players, right? You have a whole group of new players. They're not sure what to do, but you're a seasoned player and storyteller. So making their ductus for the beginning of the game. Once they're comfortable, like in a Sabacc game specifically, once they're comfortable with the roles and what's going on, now you get to develop how this person is going to die or leave, and leave that vacuum for the PCs to go, oh shit, now it's our turn. But you've given them the building blocks for that by watching your NPC. Never have it be your favorite character. This guy's going to be with you the whole story. This is a teaching tool that will come away when the training wheels come off. When you are ready, it will be up to you.
That opens up a host of other things to talk about in terms of Sabacc games and, you know, weird things I've seen doing org storytelling in Sabacc. But that's a topic for another time entirely. Actually, maybe I'll talk about that with Amara. But the crazy shit that we've seen as org storytellers. And subchords. Regardless, though, I think there's one final question that I want to make sure I try to ask everybody who comes up and talks with us. Before I get there, thank you for coming on and talking with the chat and talking with me about these things. But the question is, if you could go back and tell yourself as a brand new storyteller or a DM one piece of advice about running games, what would it be?
Have fun. If you're not having fun, your players are not having fun. Have fun.
Legit. That's really legit. I think that's a problem with some storytellers. You know, gaming becomes an obligation, man. I'm the prince now.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, we've seen it happen. Yeah. We get so comfortable with certain people storytelling, it's almost hard to step up and be like, I want to storytell. And that in itself creates anxiety, especially if you're like, I don't think I'm as good as that person. It's really not about being as good as anyone else, because everyone's going to have a different style of storytelling. It's about making the table fun. Yeah. You have fun, your players have fun. Regardless of how the game goes, if you're having fun, you're doing it right.
I think for me, one of the things I would tell myself, but if I had one piece, it would probably be know when to step down.
Yes. If you were feeling burnt out, again, it comes to having fun.
Yeah.
If you're burnt out, you're no longer having fun, it's time to step back, because that's going to bleed onto your players, and eventually your game's not going to have fun in general. And it could end badly, as opposed to you going, guys, I kind of need to step back for a little bit. Is somebody else interesting? One, in storytelling, and two, I have no problems giving this game, if everyone's loving this game, giving it over to somebody else who feels confident enough to run this game. And I'll just step back, maybe take my role as a player, or step away entirely if I'm not.
And that can be really hard as a storyteller, is giving your baby to somebody else to do new stories with and do their own thing with. I think that's one of the hardest things about stepping back or stepping down as a storyteller is like, either do I end the whole thing or do I pass it off? And a lot of people would rather just end it, than pass it off. And that's a really tricky thing to kind of decide how you want to handle for yourself. But that's gonna do it for our time. We're just by the hour mark. Thank you guys for showing up. Next Thursday at the same time, 8 o'clock, we're gonna do another 8 to 9 Q&A with another storyteller. I think we're probably gonna talk about World of Darkness, because that could be really fun. Jeff, thank you so much for coming with us. And everybody else, have a good night.
Thank you for having me.